everybody. This is Matt Valley. Welcome to episode number 132 of the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and analytics pros that you trust. Well, today is a really fun episode because it's kind of like a hall of mirrors, right? So you and I, we both listen to our music and our podcasts on Spotify. I also create content on the platform, music and this podcast, of course. And so, wouldn't you know, our guest today, Erik Peterson, is the Director of Insights for Podcast Product at where you guessed it, Spotify. Super cool, super cool. So, Erik started his career at Millward Brown Vermeer, and he's got this really super fun story of a side hustle he took on during his time at Spotify. So, we have a lot to get into. It's going to be a super fun episode. Welcome to the show, Erik.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Excited to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you. You know that I
Yep.
usually like to start on the research side,
Yeah.
right? So I'm very curious to know. I know you started out at Miller Brown Vermeer. You did your undergrad at DePaul, right?
Yes.
So when did research and insights, analytics, when did that first start forming a possibility in your brain?
Ooh, that's such a good way to phrase it. It's still, like I think I just kind of, as I've heard a lot of your episodes, people that kind of found themselves falling into it.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I wanted to do when I got done with college. I took some marketing classes. I probably learned some research along the way in a few of those classes, but was really kind of like had no idea where I wanted to get started. Actually started very briefly in a cold call sales job and just hated it. I was in a windowless room and decided to kind of take a leap of faith because I met some people when I was traveling to visit my dad at one point in New York. And I ran into, you mentioned Millward Brown Vermeer, and it's changed names a handful of times, but now kind of under the Kantar Consulting bucket. And met some people, found them really interesting. They asked me really fascinating questions and just kind of took a very traditional consulting, like problem solving type of approach. And I
Mhm.
really liked that. I really liked numbers. I was decent enough at math, and I liked trying to like bring some of that puzzle solving
Yeah.
into my work life. And so I just kind of kept following that curiosity and following the people. And that's kind of what brought me into it. And so before I knew it, I found myself in that role as like an entry level analyst and got really addicted to just trying to find an answer and trying to like
Right.
build the research around the questions that we had clients that were asking us. So that was kind of my entry into it. And it's kind of funny how much you can wake up the next morning and been doing it for almost 15 years at this point.
I can totally understand that though. Once you get into that problem solving piece, it consumes you. I just knew it. I fell in love with the whole idea of research and insights once that clicked for me. It was just
Yeah.
so addictive, and it still is. You still get that payoff, and so it keeps me around. It sounds like it
Yeah.
keeps you around too.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Spotify. I know you've been there for 9 years now. That's a pretty good that's a pretty good tenure at a tech company like that.
Yeah. Again, it feels like longer and shorter at the same time. So I guess that's probably a good sign. But I just crossed or I'm crossing the 9 year mark this month, which is crazy to think about. So um, the very simple view of my resume is I worked at Miller Brown for a couple of years, for 3 years. Loved that. Got an opportunity to go client side and was really curious what was happening on the other side of reports that we delivered
Yeah.
on the consulting side. And then I've been at Spotify for 9 years since then. But the click in from that, I've had a bunch of different roles. Spotify's grown like crazy over that time. We were private for the first couple of years. We went public and did an IPO. And so there was a whole journey of learning and kind of going through that process. But I've had 4 roles at Spotify. I'll kind of do the cliff notes, but if you want to double click anywhere, happy to do that. So
Yeah.
I started, I was in the marketing department. I built out a lot of our brand tracking, segmentation work for the marketing team, focused on the consumer side. I moved into a product innovation team. We did a lot of really cool, innovative work of just thinking outside of the box of how we acquire new users in developing countries, developing markets, places that don't have great devices or bandwidth. How do we really like start to bring consumers over that are maybe intimidated or didn't like the like normal Spotify experience? So we built completely distinct apps, we built completely distinct products. It was really cool space to work in. And then I worked in a business strategy role and capacity and did a lot of just return on investment, trying to understand impact on key metrics. And then I've had this current role, and where you mentioned it's a little bit meta that we're doing a podcast talking about my role in podcast
I was
because,
trying to avoid that word. That's why I said Hall of Mirrors. And now you're using
uh, but I've been in this role for 3 years, and so Spotify is divided up into a matrix in that we have a couple of horizontals, things like personalization, the consumer experience, platform ubiquity, and then we have content verticals. So music, which we're very known for and was our
it.
first content vertical, podcasts, and now audiobooks. And so I inhabit the podcast vertical there. We work really closely with all the different teams across those horizontals and a little bit with the other verticals. And so I essentially lead a team of data scientists and analytics engineers and user researchers, and we do a little bit of market research mixed in there as well to help understand what goes on in the podcast world, how we can help creators like you, how we can help enterprises that manage dozens or hundreds of podcasts, and then how we kind of help them understand and plug into the vast, vast world of Spotify users, where we have over 600 million monthly active users and 260 million plus premium subscribers. So that's kind of the world that we inhabit. And it's really fun because there's a lot of users and a lot of podcasts and a lot of potential in terms of how you can improve that day to day.
Yeah, yeah, and I know we were talking a little bit before we jumped on here, where you mentioned some features that are here or coming around video for podcasts and things like that. I'm super excited about that. So I've already learned something really valuable from our chat. So anything else coming that I should be aware of? That's cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, video is a huge one, and hopefully people start to see video. We just heard so much feedback from creators, from users, a huge emphasis. It helps connect with the creators in a deeper way. It helps you kind of understand and see mannerisms and all of that kind of stuff. So video is going to be a big presence as we kind of shift a little bit more, but always having the ability to put it in your pocket and have it in the background as well. That's kind of what differentiates us. The other really cool and exciting one that we've done a lot on recently is comments. So a lot of people don't realize, but
Ah,
there's comments now available on podcasts for Spotify.
right.
So you as a creator, if you have somebody that consumes the show, you can go in and see what people are saying about it. They can open a dialogue. And so there's kind of just like the entry point that we have so far, and there's a lot of potential in terms of where we go with that. So making it a little bit more interactive is a big focus for us as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a real differentiator. And I find myself sometimes, just doing something different in an episode or something like that, and wanting to get the feedback from the people who saw it, and there's nowhere to give it, and so you don't get it. I might just call somebody that I know who might have watched it and say, "Hey, what you think of that's my only recourse." So that's awesome. I'm excited about that. Cool. Cool. Excellent. Just one jog aside, because I know I speak for a lot of people. It's not podcast related, but I speak for a lot of people when I say how much I love the Spotify Wrapped. And I know you've been
Oh,
around
yes.
a while, so I'm just curious if you've had any hand in that over the years.
Yeah, I would say if you've been here for long enough, you have some role that you've played in Wrapped over the years. So I was definitely involved in some of the earlier iterations of it. The business strategy role that I did, a lot of it was understanding how Wrapped can play a role in consumer sentiment and how it can really, we know things in terms of like engagement and reactivating people that maybe hadn't used the product in a while, but it's also like the kind of softer metrics that it really helps of just intangibles that I don't think a lot of other companies are going to spend the resources to invest
Right.
as heavily as we do. So it's a huge effort. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of people at this point that work on it every year, and it's become like a cultural moment, which is really cool.
I could just imagine how fun it is for the people at Spotify sitting around the room. Those labels that came out this year that would say like January through March was your Ride 'em Cowboy phase, and then April through was your '90s Riot Girl, phase kind of
Yeah,
thing. All that stuff was just it was just riotous and super fun to read. So
the creative team definitely gets to flex their muscles a little bit with that, which is fun.
yeah, it's great stuff. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about this awesome side hustle that you took on while you're at Spotify and why you did it and what you might have learned.
Yeah, it's a goofy one, and I haven't really said it out loud that often, so I'm curious if people find it interesting. But I moved during the pandemic to Colorado. I used to be based in New York. I live up in near Aspen, Colorado, which is a great area, but it's a little bit more remote, a little bit rural. In that we don't have a ton of there's public transit in terms of buses, but there's no real presence of Ubers or Lyfts. And
Right.
so combined with my frustration of that, of kind of, hey, I went to a concert, I'd like a ride home that's not taking the bus, combined with we talk a lot about Spotify as a platform, and we want to build it as this platform that has the supply demand dynamics, but we have users that we all know about, and many of us are. We have creators, so we have like close to 7 million different podcast shows. We have tons and tons of different musical artists. And then we have advertisers. So we're kind of building and we have to think about the trade offs of all of those. And so the other platform that we know and use a lot and I talk a lot about is Uber. And so I became an Uber driver for a weekend. I decided to not continue because it's a lot of work and I have a lot of
Yeah.
respect for Uber drivers after that. I went through the pains of registering my car, getting it inspected, doing all the qualifications that you have to do, which is great. But it's really fascinating. And the reason that it provided benefit to me in my job is understanding Uber's constantly thinking about their supply demand and the dynamics of their platform and making sure it's attractive for their users, their riders, but also for their drivers.
Right.
And the balance of those things, you never want to like have too tilted in either direction.
Right.
And so even just downloading the Uber driver app and understanding the flow of how we bring people in, how they have to go through the verification, the follow-ups, the nudges that you get, the encouragement and the incentives that you get if you do your first 10 rides or if you do your first day and you get a $50 bonus. They have so many of these kind of like growth hack programs
Yeah.
that it's really interesting. And so it was really helpful because I could bring some of that in thinking one of our goals is to get more podcasters or to get more video creators to come to the platform. How does Uber approach that? How could we maybe take some of those hacky ideas that they try to attract a driver into like a region that doesn't have a ton of drivers and try
Yeah.
to pump that supply into the market? So it was a really fun exercise. I'm glad that I did it. I'm also glad to not have to. I mean, it's just a lot of work to coordinate, make sure my back seat was clean. I was
Yeah.
driving people. I picked the weekend that we had the X Games in town,
Oh
uh,
man.
which had a lot of stuff and entertaining clientele to navigate as well.
Was it just a concert with X Games, people are coming and going, right? So was it just constant all day long?
Yeah, and it was a snowstorm on top of that. So
Oh,
it was, trying to make sure I was safely arriving at destinations, but like the second you're getting close to your drop off, ding, here's another person that's 15 minutes away in the snow, takes 30 minutes to get to, and trying to communicate with them and figure out that I could get there on time. So it was an exhausting weekend.
that's such a great story. I just love it. I just love it. I do want to ask about one other thing real quickly because you're so much better than the average person at this particular activity that it certainly has somehow informed your thinking, as you approach your job. So I know that you are a very successful collegiate golfer. And still to this day, if I'm not mistaken, it's you've got like a two handicap or something crazy like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Not trying to blow a bunch of sunshine up your butt now, but
I'll take it.
that kind of dedication, I'm sure, has implications for how you carry yourself through your life. So I'm curious to know what you've learned from that experience.
Yeah, I anyone that's played sports at like a collegiate level, especially, it takes a ton of work ethic. And so I played golf all through 4 years. Successful, I think you could, it's probably challenge in terms of how successful I was, but I did it and I completed it. And it work ethic being one thing, and just kind of the discipline of doing that. Golf can be exhausting more mentally than it is physically, but it was a good place to kind of get my foundation in place. The thing that I think I bring a lot into my day to day, if anybody's familiar with golfing, but it's so much qualitative, quantitative, kind of, the old left
Right.
brain, right brain type of thinking. Um, you're constantly, hey, I've got 150 yards. That's a 9 iron, but then you have to take all the field components of like what's the lie in the grass and how are my feet set and what's the wind kind of doing. And you have to do these hard calculations, but also at the end of the day, just kind of step up and feel what's right. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of my role is doing a lot of that, of just trying to look at all the numbers, look at all the facts, but there's so much that you can't calculate and that you have to kind of take into effect of competitive dynamics and where
Yeah.
the company is at and where the people are at. And so I very much kind of see my day to day as running a lot of those in my own head at this point too, and trying to think about how we just kind of get the ball in the hole and kind of figure out what that final decision is going to be.
Well, I have to admire you because I did take a run or two at golfing. I played baseball growing up, so I really had a lot of difficulty transitioning from
Baseball's
swinging a bat.
surprisingly hard. Yeah.
It was very hard. And so I never rose above beginner, and I basically quit golf after I threw my last club into the water or into the woods. So my bag
You
was
went out with a
empty and I
bang.
got to go home.
Yeah.
So that was it. That was it. What a maddening sport that is. So
It really,
I
yeah,
commend you for
I
sticking with
agree.
it. Okay. All right. So back to research again. You just have this really interesting perspective, working for a good long time with a very innovative company, sort of at the forefront of technology. Uh, Curious to know from your perspective as you look into the future of insights, what do you see there?
It's a really good question. And I think there's the doomsday approach of like it's changing everything. And then there's the very optimistic approach. And
Yeah.
I'm definitely more in the optimistic camp. I don't think it's going to take our jobs away. I think there's still going to be a lot of really interesting questions that we have to think through. The the way that I kind of summarize what I've started to notice in my own role with my team, and I think if we kind of look in the like the 3 to 5 year time span, and I'm curious if you've heard this from anyone else, but I think a lot of the distinctions and the uniqueness of roles might start to merge and they might start to meld together. So what I mean by that is I'm seeing a lot of my user researchers starting to do more data science and analysis. I'm starting to
Yeah.
see the data scientists doing a little bit of that. I'm starting to see designers kind of do a little bit of both of those and product managers be a data scientist. And so I think there's a convergence of roles and kind of day to day work that they're doing. And I think the most successful people will be kind of in the middle of that intersection and be able to dip their toe and kind of understand and work with the tools that might be developed in each of those spaces.
Yeah.
And then they'll still be like the pillars of excellence and the true like hardcore data scientist that knows all the ins and outs.
Sure.
But if you can be dangerous enough to kind of know how to talk to them, know how to translate, and know how to get something out of a tool as a first step,
Yep.
I think that's where you start to become really dangerous. So I think it's my trend to watch is kind of the convergence of roles into more just like a general insights practitioner or researcher and less of like a very, very hyper specialized type of distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting observation. I've seen a little bit of that myself, particularly when I was working in user experience. So I was working for UserZoom, and we saw, which was a platform in a UX insights platform, and we saw a lot of our users were designers, and some companies just had that model. If you were a designer there, then you were responsible for the user research on your projects. So I've definitely seen some tendencies towards what you're talking about. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And I think even as, writing code becomes a little bit easier, it's not that we're going to all be engineers tomorrow, but maybe you can take the first steps of mocking up an idea that you had and putting together a wireframe that maybe felt impossible years ago, or maybe
Yeah.
starting to put together the first steps of an app that you never thought you could have ever built on your own. So I think it's cool. It really opens the door to people trying and taking the steps at new things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times the tools are too complex for so long. The concepts aren't necessarily complex, but the tools are.
Right.
And as they become easier and easier to use and more accessible to more people, and just makes sense. Cool. All right. So I'm really interested to ask you this. Obviously, you're surrounded by Spotify all day long, but we're talking about a lot of media here, right? Podcast is media. So for you, when you're not on the clock, you've got your own time. What media are you turning to for insight, inspiration, or enjoyment? Big, broad question. What's
Yeah.
earning your time?
It would not surprise you to hear podcasts as a huge part of my
I'm not shocked at all.
yeah media. So I don't know if you consider that on the clock versus off the clock. I consume a crazy amount of podcasts. My Wrapped was definitely tilted in the favor of podcast consumption and very high at that. So
Yeah,
I probably have like 10 to 12 shows that I'm a pretty heavy regular consumer of.
sure.
Um, and so I kind of have my different categories that fit into different moments of the day. I have a lot of like comedy ones that are just a little lighthearted and try to get me, quick from point A to point B, laugh a few times.
Yeah,
Uh, I have my like how I stay informed about work and my kind of like work sphere and everything going on there. And then I have more just kind of like inspiration slash business stuff that I just like to stay informed on and spark my curiosity a little bit more. So,
sure.
uh, but all of that being podcasts, my reading a little bit more limited, and TV is kind of dwindled to nothing in favor of podcast consumption.
Yeah. If you wanted to name like one or two personal favorite podcasts,
Oh gosh, yeah.
what'd you throw out there?
So one that kind of fits across all of those buckets, both like kind of funny, kind of motivating, and kind of important in terms of what I do day to day for work. Acquired is a really great podcast.
Interesting. I don't know that one.
Yeah, so it's two guys. They were venture capitalists. They've gone all in actually over the past year as this is their full-time job. They pick one company and they do one episode a month and they do a crazy deep dive. They do 3 to 7 hour episodes. And so they've done like they used to just do tech, but they've started to venture outside. So they've done Costco. They did Taylor Swift as her own business, which was really
Yeah.
interesting. They've done Porsche, Louis Vuitton are all like really fascinating episodes. And then recently they've done ones like IKEA, family owned, huge history. So that's a really cool one and interesting one. Um, and then other like interesting AI Daily Brief is a great podcast. It's a daily video episode about just 15 minutes stuff going on in AI if people like to stay informed on that. So those are a
Cool.
couple of the ones I've been heavily consuming recently.
Yeah, as you started to explain it, someone else told me about Acquired, and it's one I'm definitely going to check out because the idea of it I'm really into. So I love the
Yep.
deep dive. That's what I like. So I'm gonna check that out. Excellent, good news. All right, so we've gotten this far, Eric. We haven't talked a word about rock and roll, and this is a rock and roll research podcast. So I can't disappoint our listeners. We have to go there. We just have to, whether you like it or not.
I'm all for it. I work in podcasts now, but when I started at Spotify, there were no podcasts. There was only music, and music was a huge part of it. So
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
here for it.
All right. All right. Let's do it then. Okay. So, Eric, let's say you're stranded on a desert island. You've got three records, maybe podcast playlists, um, or not podcast playlists, but Spotify playlists,
Yep.
whatever you like. You've got three buckets of music here to keep you company for the rest of your days. What are they?
I had to I'm gonna buck the trend and not cheat my way into using the Spotify playlist because I do enjoy albums still, and I think
Awesome.
there's still a major thing that we have to pay attention to. Okay, I tried to do a little bit of a mix of things from my more formative, earlier years of consumption, and also a little bit more recent. So, first one is Gorilla's Demon Days,
Yeah.
which is fantastic and was so good when it came out. And I had forgotten about it and I rediscovered it recently. Every track on that album is solid. And the whole Gorillaz world is a fun one to explore for people that might not be as familiar with it.
Yeah, I love that. I just saw somebody declare that the best album of all time.
Damn.
So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. Somebody on my Facebook said this is it.
Uh,
This is number one. So,
I would like to shake their hand because yeah, it's up there for me. It's a good one.
okay, what's
Number
next?
two is a more recent. I'm also a big hip hop fan, and Tyler the Creator, Flower Boy, was I can go back and listen to all those songs. I think he's done awesome stuff since then, but that one was like a turning point for me, and I think that was
Yeah,
one of the best hip hop albums of the last 10 years.
love it, love it.
And then my last one I've always been a big Radiohead fan, and I know that can be somewhat controversial on its own, but In Rainbows is such an amazing album. I feel like I would listen to that constantly when I was younger, and so that's always like a go-to. It's a very seasonal one for me. I feel like it's like entering the fall. Things are
Yeah,
getting darker, and the leaves are falling, and that feels like a good time for some Radiohead. So I always like to play that one every year.
awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, I don't like to self-promote, but I should say, I'm wearing the shirt of one of the three bands that I have on Spotify. It's pretty. You'll never be able to find it because there are about 5,000 bands and songs with the name Pretty in it. Well, actually, a lot more. So, so I have no worries you're going to find it, but it's out there. So, Eric, hey, this is a super good chat.
Thanks for
Really
having me.
love it. Yeah, I'm so interested in what's going on with Podcast Insights. So I'm glad that you're open to share that on the platform, on the podcast. So very excited about that.
Yep.
Let's talk soon, Eric. Hopefully next time in person.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for having me,
Talk
Matt.
soon. Rock and roll.